Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar or grid session of 2022. Today, we are talking about cybersecurity, so how we can keep energy systems cyber secure. We recently published a report on the topic on interoperability and cybersecurity in the energy industry because as a digital-first company at gridX, we understand the importance of ongoing innovation in energy, but we also are acutely aware of the risks of cyber attacks and how important it is to constantly mitigate them. So today we'll be talking to two experts who I will introduce later. But first up, I'd like to tell you that you can write comments in the chat on the side, and we will do our best to answer all of those questions that you send. If we don't get to them, then we will answer them after the webinar, and then we will publish it on our website. And you can see those answers. We'll send the link to the website to you in an email afterwards. We were also recording today's session, and we will be uploading that video on the website alongside the questions and answers. So please feel free to get involved. Comments, questions are very welcome, and we want it to be as interactive as possible. So diving into the topic, I'll give a quick introduction, and then I will hand over to our experts to start the discussion. So, as I mentioned, we recently published the report, and that really talks about how distributed energy resources, electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, inverters, just to name a few, have experienced a huge rise in adoption in recent years. But to ensure grid reliability, these devices must be able to talk to each other and to the grid. This is where interoperability comes in, the ability of smart grid actors, components, and applications to exchange information. So interoperability is particularly important in scaling renewable energy, as this is inherently intermittent and decentralized. A self-sufficient home using solar power, as we see here on the right, for example, unlike the house on the left, must be able to balance energy generation and consumption. This is only possible with cloud, IoT, and interoperable technologies that enable increased interconnection between the devices and the systems. On a larger scale, interoperable technologies enable a huge number of really exciting use cases for the new energy era. So for example, we have smart districts, where multi-energy conversion systems that include local energy production, hydrogen, e-mobility, and clean heating is only possible with interoperability. This is the same for energy communities, where users can trade energy to increase flexibility. It also enables virtual power plants, where energy players are able to bring the flexibility of decentralized energy systems to ancillary markets. And of course, e-mobility, things like dynamic load management to increase scale and better integrate EVs into the grid, only possible with interoperability. However, the same interoperable technologies that open up these use cases also introduce new interdependencies and potential vulnerabilities. Sadly, cybersecurity incidents are a very real reality in Europe and globally. Attacks and breaches happen in a variety of ways in energy systems, highlighting that there isn't just one solution to make sure that systems are resilient and to prevent attacks. As you can see here, ransomware, a type of malware that prevents or limits users from accessing their system until a ransom is paid, is a pretty popular form of attack. To heighten the threat of cybersecurity incidents, the power grid is expected to grow by 80% this decade to reach 16 million kilometres. If the right systems aren't properly implemented, this could easily result in a higher attack surface, making the system more vulnerable. However, with the right measures, such as minimizing attack surface, encrypting sensitive information, and so on, this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. There are a range of principles, strategies, and processes that should be implemented by companies all along the energy value chain to build and maintain resilience in the new energy era. The CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, are often used as the guiding principles to manage cyber risk. Confidentiality involves the need for information to be protected from disclosure to unauthorized parties. Integrity is the ability to ensure that data is not modified or corrupted. And availability is the assurance that information can always be acquired and used when needed. To discuss the risks and solutions of cybersecurity in more detail, we have Philippe Franke, Senior Software Developer at gridX, as well as Jan Hoff, Senior Expert Penetration Testing at E.ON. Philippe Franke has been working at gridX for 5 years, and ever since he first started working with computers, his interest in cybersecurity best practices and the methods for minimizing cyber risks has grown exponentially. Jan, it is his job at E.ON to defend everything that concerns IT security and cyber attacks. So on top of penetration testing, he also works on consulting and projects in the area of risk management, which essentially involves better understanding the mindset of a hacker. Very pleased to have these two with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. All right, let's go ahead with the questions. So, can you provide some examples of what could happen if proper cybersecurity measures aren't in place in the energy industry? So, in other words, why is it so important? Jan, starting with you.
Yeah, so I think the statement that if things fail has to be differentiated a bit. So there's the what could happen question is very broad, and especially when talking about energy systems and systems of systems, because it's not one single element, but we're talking a lot of different players here. So the effects of a failure in cybersecurity protective measures will be different on where it hits and how big that hits. Due to the current events, I think a quick look back into the Ukraine 2015, 2016 shows that our networks from a computer perspective are, or were at that time in the Ukraine, not that well protected, which basically meant that a hacker was able to get in, or a group of hackers was able to get in and interact with the system, being the power system here, and create power outages. Is that the worst case scenario that we're talking about? Probably that someone is intent on creating a blackout for our energy network. But going a bit closer to the bottom, even if we're looking at a smaller municipality being hit by ransomware, also there's a failure of cybersecurity protective measures, be it on the human or the technical side. Looking towards the Oldsmar water facility, that was also a failure to properly plan for remote access. Looking at the Colonial Pipeline, again, a ransomware incident. Those are individual incidents which do not result in the huge apocalypse everyone is talking in the industry about, which in my opinion is something we all have to work on, that's a thing that's not going to happen. So let me get out the crystal ball. What can happen if cybersecurity measures fail? Basically everything. Will that happen? I really doubt it.
Philip, would you add anything to that?
Yes, actually, I like to add an example for another sector, which is the health sector, because we are just talking about the energy industry. However, I think last year or the year before, the Düsseldorfer University Hospital was hit by a ransom attack. That was actually, according to the media, not even the target. And I think here we can see that, like, the critical infrastructure we are maintaining from the energy industry, but also in other sectors, that is really necessary, to live our lives. And having vulnerabilities there brings people in danger. As you said, Jan, I think that the cascading failure, for example, if the power grid is not working, seems to be pretty isolated in most cases. However, I think there's still a risk at it.
Yeah, so the whole idea of considering the energy industry as individual players doing their part to safeguard their systems, to implement cybersecurity measures only for their environment, is admirable, but it's probably not going to protect civilization, society as a whole, because, for example, if one big player fails, or one element in the whole physical setup fails, as we've seen, for example, when the cruise ship was moved towards the North Sea and the power lines were planned shut down, and that resulted in a three-way split of the European grid. So that shows that there is a bigger thing, and that only if all work together and all have the same high level of security, that then we also have a resilient network, and that we still can rely on manual overrides. That was also some of the things you were able to see from the Ukraine incident in 2015. There were still people able to go into the substations and turn the breakers back on. And the more and more we are relying and solely relying on IT equipment, that IT equipment needs to be as fault tolerant as a manual switch, the manual breaker that you can flip. And that's a challenge. And that's a challenge not one single company, one single player can do, but we as an industry have to tackle as a whole.
Just quickly before we continue, I'd just like to tell the audience that if you refresh your page, then the chat function should be able to work, and then you can ask your burning questions, which I'm sure you have. And then Philip, what is unique about the energy industry compared to other industries? Why is cybersecurity a little bit different for us?
I think that the energy transition is one of the most challenging projects in this decade, and therefore the energy industry needs to solve upcoming problems and maybe develop solutions that are not probably not working in the long term because of, for example, regulation changes, etc. And keeping those things in mind, you also need to think about the potential security risk you are need to handle, basically. And from my understanding, even if it's difficult to prioritize cybersecurity in the energy or in the energy industry because of so many changing parts right now, I think it's really necessary that everybody in that picture, so we are looking at a distributed network of companies that are responsible for the infrastructure, and they have like the responsibility to keep it secure. And I think it's also important to prioritize that, because if, for example, a ransom hack happens, I think that customers lose trust in a company, and therefore it all boils down to, for example, being GDPR compliant and being able to be a trustworthy company in the end. And that comes to my, I would say, last point. In the end, a failure or a cybersecurity incident seems to me always like bad publicity, and probably the trust is then gone. And if you have like the best idea and you have no trust, nobody wants your product in the end. So cybersecurity should have a high priority for companies, especially in the energy industry.
I like the point that Philip is making, that our energy industry is currently transforming into something which is more than just providing customers with electricity. It's more than just a working grid. We're talking about an industry that's transforming into very digital business cases, which involve charging of electric vehicles, having photovoltaic on roofs of normal houses feeding back into the grid. And the overall discussion about a resilient grid, power grid, is important. Looking from a customer perspective, though, we're handling as an industry customer data, and that needs obviously to be protected. Whereas in the past, you had your meter reading once a year. You provided a postcard, wrote your meter reading on it, send it back to the energy supplier. Fair enough. Now we're moving towards towards requirements where the feed in and feed out of your electricity consumption needs to be measured on a 15-minute basis or even more, where you as a customer might want to know what you're currently consuming in order to optimize your consumption. So we're talking about more digital and more data for an industry which used to be very analog. And I think that's something everyone working in the industry and working with that data needs to understand, that only can work, you said trust, if the cybersecurity is also integrated into those solutions. Putting that back on after not doing it is very, very difficult. Any retrofitting is going to have compromises. Thinking of it as a part of new business ventures, that's one of the key factors that will make it a secure energy industry. And from a history perspective, the time scale of, for example, equipment in substations has moved from 20 years lifetime still into 20 years lifetime, but the equipment has now the ability to be updated. So we have to distinguish between hardware lifetime and maybe software lifetime. And that's where there's so much going on right now in the business. And that's where we, as a community, can work to make that good from the start, or the best thing from the start.
Okay, so we know we need to work together, we need to have integrated solutions. Let's talk about concrete steps that companies can take to ensure that their solutions are cyber secure, both now and in the future. Philip, what would you say there?
Yeah, in general, I think, well, you probably heard in most cases that developers and security experts always say there's not like 100% security in the end. However, what is, I think, in my opinion, really essential is that a company knows the risk. So one of the possible steps is doing like a risk assessment to understand the threat models and also what your potential damage would be, but also what the potential damage of other people or other companies would be. In that case, that is, from my understanding, like the first step. However, in the meantime, you can already establish like processes and leverage tools to make everything following like best practices. So for example, all at gridX, or all of our infrastructure at gridX, is based on AWS, and we use the AWS Foundation benchmark to constantly ensuring that all of the infrastructure we are using are following the AWS security best practices. And we are running that like multiple times a day, so we can immediately detect and intervene if there's something that shouldn't be in that case. And that is just one tool we are using. But from that on, we establish like processes at gridX to make security like a first-class citizen at everything. So to understand that we moved security to the left, so at the beginning of the entire process, or as soon as possible, actually. And that means in like simple words, or for an example, that means that considering security aspects during like the ideation phase of a feature prevents like increasing costs in the end, because we thought about potential risk and potential issues that can come up like in the beginning of the feature, and not like the end where we have already developed everything and then we need to add more and more to make it secure. And on top of that, we are integrating security tools in our development pipelines to do static analysis or code scanning to find vulnerabilities. That is just like one aspect of our processes, but also which is really important, which we are doing on the gridbox level, but also on the cloud level, is minimizing the attack surface. And from my understanding, this is like really obvious, because if you think about like a house and you have like multiple doors and windows, they are like potential break-ins, I would say. And you could probably, or in most cases, you could reduce the number of doors and windows. And that's similar to what we are doing in software. It's not like doors or windows. We have interfaces, dependencies, and network ports. However, in the end, it's like really necessary to be aware what kind of potential entry points are there and how you can protect them. And if you think about the example with the house, you probably want to have windows and you want to have doors to come in. And if you have those things like doors and windows, you probably want to have like an alert to detect an intruder. And this goes in the same direction software development and software operating. You need to find ways to detect like anomalies and other stuff. Yeah, that is like just a few processes. Maybe Jan, do you want to add something?
Can definitely do so. To have it tangible for any member of the audience, we might be coming from an operator perspective or from a developer perspective. When I and we look into security measures and on things you should be taking, I'm just taking the bare minimum, the hygiene level now that everyone can do, and they're, well, in theory, not really expensive and give you the edge over the attackers. So the first step, before you do anything, before you start implementing security measures, Philippe already said it, there's this concept of threat modeling, of risk management. You need to understand what is coming at you. If your threat model is the ransomware script kiddie who's trying to get into your systems by using standard known exploits from 10 years ago, that might be a different level of protection that you want to establish than if you're talking about the nation state sponsored attacker, depending on how your current security level already is. You can't go from 0 to nation state protection. That just doesn't work. Like if you're a sprinter and you're training for the Olympics, you're not going to be Usain Bolt within a week. Same applies for the security measures you want to implement. So step one, threat modeling, risk management, assessing the risk. What do you want to protect yourself against, and what maybe you can protect yourself against just because it's high in nature. The second thing is visibility that you want to have. Visibility that is for operators, that's also for software development. You need to know what you have in your networks, in your code, because only then you can apply security measures. If you're, for example, running a software library for logging, let's hypothetically call it log4j, and you don't know about that, you might be subject to risk that you don't know, and anything you don't know can't be handled, accepted, or transferred. So transparency and visibility into your systems and into your code. Then the third one, which you can also rather easily get as a first step, as a preparation measure, is information exchange, is information sharing. Connect yourself within your community, within the peer group, with government agencies, because they're the ones that might know about things like log4j vulnerability, like the threat level that might be coming today from the Russian/Ukraine conflict, and they can share that with you, and you can do an assessment based on that. You need information in order to plan your detection or plan your protection. Then moving one step further in the chain, the operation. If you operate something or you have code that is being developed, continuously look into it. Are there vulnerabilities? Are there issues? Is there something new coming on which you need to handle and need to address? And that's a continuous effort. And depending on the size of your organization, it can take a lot of labor to have that dealt with, and also utilize third-party view. Basically, that's my job, to provide a third-party view on risks and vulnerabilities which come with products, with devices, with infrastructures, and allow for proper risk management while you operate it. Again, feeding in the information from the first phase. And then if you operate something, Philippe said it, detect anomalies. You have to see if things are not running as planned. It might be an attack. It might also be just a server running out of disk space. It might just be a memory running full and dangling pointer if you're coming from the software development area. So you have to detect it and you have to react to it. And coming then to the third part now, the reaction part. If you see anomalies, you have to be prepared. Greta said it, we see attacks in any industry on a daily basis, some more severe, some less. But you have to have the ability to react if things hit you. And if you're a smaller organization and you don't have the capability or the resources to do that in-house, plan for the event that you might need external help. And if you're subject, for example, to a ransomware attack, it is not something you can do within an hour, call someone and you have someone helping you. You need preparation and you need training. You need exercises. The what if questions need to be answered. Start out with tabletop exercises. Do we know what to do, whom to call, which connections to sever, for example, over to full-blown adversary emulations where you get someone in-house or even have someone in-house that is pretending to be the enemy, the attacker inside your own network, and see, do you detect it? Do you know how to react to it? And do you learn from the findings to be even better? And that's the three levels that you can actually, with rather mediocre effort, implement in nearly any organization, any project. And that makes a very good foundation for cybersecurity.
Philippe, would you add anything to that? Perhaps, I guess, how can we also leverage automation to
Good point.
to complement people's skills and reactions?
Yeah, so leveraging automation is actually like a key part for gridX because our infrastructure is changing pretty fast and constantly. So what we can do with automation is it helps us secure our infrastructure by automated validation or also like over-the-air updates. So keeping everything at the latest state. So for example, we have like grid boxes in the field, and those grid boxes, if they would have like some kind of vulnerability, we are always able to update them and to patch them immediately. And this is what Jan already mentioned. We know what kind of risk could happen, and therefore we implemented like processes and automation to prevent or to handle those cases to reduce the risk in that case. That is just leveraging automation from my point of view at gridX. But I also like to add to the point that Jan made about like third-party tests, for example. What I think is also really important in like the development process itself is like the 4 eyes principle, because reviewing like somebody else's code and seeing, for example, potential pointer issues or like other security issues, not like functional based problems, but like really security issues or like mishandled like authentication and so on. That can be all done by just having a second pair of eyes looking at the code, and that could or will prevent probably like big issues like right in the beginning of the process and not in the end where, for example, some penetration tester tries out everything, which is still necessary and should be done. However, if you can detect most of the stuff in like the early phases of like ideation, feature implementation, testing, and so on, you do not have any risk in production if you finding all of the or most of the issues like in the beginning of the developing phases.
Very good point. Also coming from a From a business case perspective and from a resource perspective, the earlier you actually tackle security issues and don't don't have them happen, the less expensive they're getting. It might be someone refactoring a code, maybe writing additional check into it at the beginning or during the project startup phase, saying, okay, we need a proper logging and monitoring in our new system or new environment. That is probably a hassle at the beginning. Also from a money perspective, makes your product a bit more expensive. But think about what happens if, at the end, when that thing is implemented, that safeguard, that check needs to be put through. You have to go through the whole build pipeline. You might need to add additional features. You might compromise on certain functionalities to have security built in backwards. And that is just from a commercial perspective, usually the worst the worst solution.
And building on top of that, Jan, what is more important, offensive or defensive cybersecurity measures?
Definitely defensive. So anyone advocating things like we need to hack back, if we see an attack, let's hack back, that doesn't actually work in the digital world, and it probably also doesn't work in the physical world, but focusing on the digital world here. So you might want to ask, hey, Jan is a penetration tester and they're doing offensive things, don't they? Yes, we do, but we see ourselves as part of the defensive team. And why? We help the defensive team to get better. We help them to have the security measures in place before the bad guys actually are able to get in. So that's why defensive first, but you need also to have some offensive mindset, some offensive measures in order to have the defense at the highest level. If you take a sports club, they always have the team versus team to also train offensive and defensive. Same applies for this discussion, which is more important. So I usually say we have a blue team, the defenders, we have the red team, the attackers, which train the blue team to be the best they can. And currently the industry is heading, so the cybersecurity industry is heading to something called the purple team. That's where the defenders and the attackers are doing joint projects, are doing joint exercises, so that both can learn from each other to have the best solution of both. So offensive is important to train the defensive. Hacking back is a very bad idea, especially you don't know who attacked you. Could be someone using proxies and jumping from one system to the other. And before we invest in any offensive capabilities, your defensive capabilities need to be at least up to par to profit from the offensive capabilities.
I actually like the approach because when I'm thinking about it, it just actually comes down to sharing knowledge between like different teams, because I foresee that like the attacker or the offensive part is really concentrating on like other stuff, so they try to find some kind of vulnerability, whereas the defense side is just looking at how you can detect those things. And if you haven't seen anything like that before, you're probably not aware that there is something there. So you're combining both, and like the purple team really, from my understanding, makes sense to just improve both sides basically, for example, within a company, to make it more resilient against like outside attackers.
Yeah, the whole concept is also building on the idea that a good attacker makes also a good defender and vice versa. Think of, you get yourself an alarm system for your house and you trust the installer to have done everything correctly. You might have even tripped an alarm, you know it works, but does it really work against the threat actor you're protecting against? Or does it only work when your cat is running around the house when your alarm is armed and suddenly you have false alarms? It also helps you to, so the idea of having tests from an attacker perspective to tune your alarms to what you actually need to be looking at. As said, you can't protect yourself from 0 to 100 against nation-state actors, and you probably can't do that at all. But you can successively get better in your protective levels, and by adding that offensive mindset, it allows you to see things which are probably currently coming from the market, and you might, as a defensive team, have not incorporated because of your daily business, of your daily work. And that's where the idea of threat intel and the information sharing, which I said in the last 2-3 minutes ago, is that you need to know what's currently going on, what is the threat landscape, in order to tune your detective measures and maybe to pretend to be exactly that attacker that's currently going around. It's probably not worthwhile to now emulate someone, I don't know, stealing money from some sort of computer if everyone is currently protecting against ransom or a victim of ransomware. So you want to be protecting exactly against that. And once you have finished that, so you have a certain maturity level in your organization, go up a notch. But do the basics, do the hygiene before trying to do the next gen quote unquote thing.
And we've had a question from the audience. How could blockchain technology contribute to security? Blockchain is often a question from audiences. Would anyone like to jump in and take that question?
Philip, from the developer perspective or from the hacker's perspective, I'm also comfortable for saying something on that.
I'm personally not familiar so much with blockchain itself, especially with like contributing to security. Yeah, so I would give you the opportunity to say something to that question.
Yeah, the question is something we are focusing as a community, as an industry, maybe also from a software development perspective, a lot on what is technology XYZ bringing to us. And that is often currently either blockchain or quantum. It is important that we see each individual technology and see the benefits, the risks, and maybe how those things develop. It is a very generic question. How can that benefit security? There are definitely use cases where a blockchain might be able to store identities or be able to have transparency and have the assurance that certain things happened or did not happen. But it's not a silver bullet. You can't just slap blockchain onto whatever, and then it's more secure. It has to be part of the bigger picture. And if blockchain is one of the building blocks, pun intended, that's where it's a solution just like any other else, whether you have a two-factor authentication or whether you have proper filtering of data input and output. It's just one building block of the bigger security concept, of the bigger security landscape. What we also see quite a lot is that people think because it's blockchain, it's automatically secure. There are a lot of really, really insecure blockchains, and the whole concept is still in development. It's probably still in its infancy, and it will grow over the next years. Well, they say that since a few years, but especially with the new chains, you're often talking about abuses which are in the code because no one has looked into it. So just adding blockchain as a concept does not make you more secure, but blockchain itself can be one of the building blocks to create more secure, more transparent, and more auditable function systems, contracts, however you want to draw the line where blockchain starts, smart contracts end. I hope that answers the question to a certain extent because it's rather broad. And well, blockchain is not the silver bullet.
Mm-hmm. And talking more broadly about cybersecurity, Philip, what keeps you up at night when it comes to cybersecurity, and how can we best address whatever concerns you, do you think?
What keeps me up at night? I think the major issue, which we mentioned a few times, is that we have like more and more software and more, for example, dependencies, and that is probably or means in the end more attack potential from my point of view. And I for me it's really difficult that you have like a really distributed network like of different parties, not within a company, but um, um, yeah, around the company as well. So different companies that are using your technology and so on, and keeping all of that complexity in mind, and have like the trust in the other parties to follow like best practice, security best practices, and so on. Really keeps me awake, I would say, because in the end, we need to keep track of the entire system, and that is constantly changing, and there are so many changing parts that could introduce like new vulnerabilities. And I'm really hoping that everybody is contributing to security in their product that probably we are using or others are using, to keep everything safe and keep everything running. And that is like a lot of things are really black boxes from like the outside. So you only know that it's working or not, but you do not know what's inside it. And that's really important for me, that like, for example, software developers are just thinking about what kind of dependency they want to use, what kind of risk it just adds to our software. And I also see that issue by like other companies that needs to think about, do I want, for example, use the for JLogger and so on, because it's like a big library which is doing a lot of things that helps me to have shorter time to market, for example. But in the end, I'm blindly trusting it, and therefore that keeps me really up at night, to have all of the dependencies here that we are using, but also other people are using, in mind, and have them secure, and validate them that everything is running smoothly.
What about you, Jan?
Oh, well, I would say there are two things. There's not one thing, and there's probably not only those two things, but those are the ones which are in my mind on a daily basis. One, complexity, and two, transformation. As a quick reminder, there is the possibility to ask questions via the chat. So anything coming in is going to be answered. I'm sure of that. So feel free to use that, and also ask questions. But now back to what keeps me up. So the complexity part. We increase complexity as a society, as an industry on a daily basis, probably, where there used to be a single breaker being switched on and off. We now have PLCs doing that work. That is probably beneficial from a maintenance, from a safety, from a data point perspective, but that increases complexity, and complexity needs to be managed. And once you have or increase complexity without managing it, you're introducing risks. And I think as an industry, we have the responsibility to see that and to also manage it. So complexity on the one hand, and the other is the transformation. Other industries might have had the advantage of being able to tear everything down and build something new from the bottom. The energy industry is not like that. The energy industry has been on the planet for, I have to guess now, at least 100+ years. And the general concept of bringing electricity from A to B hasn't really changed. And we can't just break everything down and build something new and and fresh from the box. We have to take existing systems, replace certain parts, extend certain parts, and by doing so, yes, we again increase complexity, but we also have to balance between the new and the old world. It's not something that you replace transformers all over Germany. It's super expensive and it's super workload intense. And again, you want to maintain also power for your customers. So that needs to be a transition. And the transition is not only going away from coal, going away from nuclear to a more sustainable world, but is also going from the analog world to the digital world. But it's not something we can do with a snip of a finger, but we have to plan for it. And our security solutions need to also take into account that we will have legacy systems, that there is going to be that one substation where you're not able to just remotely flip a breaker. And to keep that in mind, these two things that keep me up at night are interlinked. But this is something we can actually do as a society, as an industry, and I'm really looking forward to the solutions that are going to come from the business side on also new business ventures that might come up, but also looking forward to the security and cybersecurity side on where we can utilize the new view into our systems, into our infrastructures to be more secure and to increase resilience even more. Just think about when was the last time something significant happened in the German power grid? It's been quite a while, and it's good that it's been quite a while, and that we have a very reliable system of systems of systems, and everything is turning digital. So it requires all of us to work together and to share information. If you find something, if you find a vulnerability, don't keep it to yourself, but share it with the broader industry, because you might be safe, but if your neighbor has an issue, then you probably also get the issue, because we have one European power grid.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jan. And we've had another question from the audience. We touched on this briefly before, but they have asked, what is your takeaway from the Log4j incidents? Philip, what is...
Yeah, luckily, gridX itself was not really affected by Log4j. However, what we are doing is, or actually gridX itself relies on open source software, and we want actually to prevent, using dependencies that using or having malicious codes inside. So what we try to achieve is that we have like some kind of gatekeeper for open source software by replicating it into our own registry and just frequently validate upcoming changes. And that helps us in the end to prevent us from injecting malicious code. However, this is just like a safeguard. We are seeing, like, from every now and then in like the node ecosystem, that there are like dependencies that are unfortunately inject malicious code, and we try to be or just try to identify it as soon as possible, based on like alertings or like the community that just shows and highlights like or issues, or even attempts to change like a code snippet and so on. And for example, at gridX, we are mainly using Go, and what is really interesting is that there was once a pull request by a security researcher that just adjusts something in the core library of Go, and everybody was like, why is the person introducing like a vulnerability into the code base. And I think we need, especially gridX itself, we need to keep track of most of the changes that of the software that we are using, but also supporting like the open source community to vet like upcoming changes and vet like the infrastructure, the code base for security vulnerabilities, so that like attackers are not doing or cannot do that and exploit that that library or dependency in our software, but also in any other software that are using that dependency. But maybe Jan can mention a little bit more about Log4j.
Yes, I can do. So my key takeaway is there is a lot of things we don't know what they are running and what their dependencies are. I think, like many teams, in December or on December 10th, we were also doing overhours, identifying systems which potentially use Java libraries like Log4j, looking into those and patching them where possible. But first step is there. You need to know where they're at. And as a software developer, you said it, Philip, the core concept of knowing which libraries you're using is so important. But also we as an operator, we also need to know what's in our software components in order to assess potential risk and to remediate that risk. If you look into the companies and products affected by such a vulnerability, and I don't think we have seen all of it yet, is super concerning that that single building blocks, which can be third and fourth and fifth dependency of another product, can potentially bring down or turn the internet into flames. And that's where the key takeaway should be that if you operate software or hardware, Tesla was also affected, you should know what you're doing, and you should also communicate if you have libraries like that, and not only communicate if there's an issue with it, but communicate proactively. That's the second thing for takeaway from Log4j, that the community effort of identifying which systems were there, identifying potential exploits, making it all better, was super important to stay safe. But on the other hand, it was too late, because at that point in time we already had the issue. So if you have open source software and if you're contributing, you're doing the right thing. You have to support open source developers and not only simply use it and accept it as a God-given fact that there is this library doing things. If you do that, also feel free to look into the code of other people. If you can't do it, get someone who does. If you, for example, publish a new version, a new product, look into it. It's more difficult than said, but the whole concept of information sharing here again, you need to know, and you also need to communicate with your vendors what you're using and when to act, and when, for example, you need to, as an operator, have a risk decision. And on the other hand, if you are a supplier, a vendor of a product, then please also communicate proactively if there are flaws. One of the key ideas that I also try to force is that if there are vulnerabilities in products, it's not a flaw in that sense, because due to the complexity, there can be vulnerabilities in everything. A flaw is if you do not communicate correctly and if you do not provide a fix for a flaw. And in this case, the developers were full alert. They provided patches on a, unfortunately, nearly daily basis. And that communication is required. And not only if the internet says it's so, but proactively. And that's a key takeaway for the Log4j, Log4Shell thing. And a key takeaway, we're more secure in the internet than I thought we were.
Very interesting, thank you. And obviously, the threats are constantly evolving. There's new technology. Hackers are finding new ways to, find a way in, and the technology solutions to deal with them are also constantly evolving. So, how can players constantly stay ahead of these evolving cyber threats and solutions? Philip?
I think it is all about sharing, and also actually that like everybody in the community is communicating what Jan mentioned, but also being able to read about it, watch like workshops, or educate yourself or the company, so you are keeping ahead of like the latest developments in the cybersecurity sections. However, I think it basically comes down to in the end, like collaboration and transparency, because if we are seeing, for example, issues by some other companies that might use the same dependency, for example, then we can actually act on it, and we are aware of like that something bad could happen in our case. And that should be, like, from my understanding, something that is really important to share knowledge to all parties that might be involved, and give the possibility to probably make it understandable, make it maybe be able to try it out yourself, to find to find the vulnerability, to exploit maybe the vulnerability in your system yourself before something else is doing that. So I think actually it comes down to like 3 parts, like educate yourself, communicate, and also try out new things in the end, to be always at the at the current cybersecurity topics. Yeah.
Jan, would you add anything to that?
How can we stay ahead? That's super difficult, because the cybersecurity world, the defenders are always behind, because we only can react once we know something, which does not allow us to be before the attackers find a new vulnerability. For example, we can patch that up front. We are always running behind. There are a lot of people who say defenders need to be right all the time and attackers need to be right only once. That might be true for a lot of things, and there are a lot of organizations which might have security holes they don't know about. But let's rephrase that one into attackers will probably one way or the other get into organizations, be it with phishing, be it with social engineering, be it with physical access. What we as a defender and we as an organization need to do is to detect those anomalies, to detect the attacker, and then react to it. Because prevention alone does not save you. It's always the threefold: protect, detect, react. And from that, then we can maybe not stay ahead, but be on an eye level, and in parentheses, fight the bad guys on the same playing field and not in a completely different game.
Thank you, Jan. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So thank you to the people that asked questions. I hope you enjoyed some of the insights from Philip and Jan. I personally found it very interesting. So once again, we have recorded this session. We'll be adding it to our website. We'll send you the link, and we'll also be answering the questions. Please get in touch if you have any more questions for Philip or Jan, or if you want to learn any more about our solutions at gridX. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great Friday.
Have a good one.